Discover the real you by uncovering the roots of your personality tree by Florence Littauer. When sin entered the world, it brought with it a splintering or fracturing of the human personality. What was once one whole and perfect is now pieced and flawed. People must now learn to live with the strengths and weaknesses of those who are totally different from themselves. How can we understand another when we have never experienced feelings and needs so common to him or her, yet totally alien to us? How shall we then love? Florence and I spent a week together during the summer of 1985 in Estes Park, Colorado, asking ourselves that very question. We desired to put together our thoughts and concepts on the personality temperaments in a way that would enable the body of Christ to develop a deeper understanding of themselves and of those with whom they were called to love and coexist. We prayed that our God would take all he had taught us and fashion the information into a work capable of bringing new light to the dilemma of human relationships. We longed for tools to help the family find unity through compassion and acceptance, and we prayed for our Lord's hand to inspire our work as a healing touch for hopeless relationships and hurting hearts. This book is the result of those prayers. Florence has once again written that which will change lives and bring new hope. Her style and sensitivity make the information both exciting and inspiring. Treat yourself now to the work of a master teacher, writer, and speaker, and prepare for a whole new world of relationships. Lana Bateman, founder, director, Philippian Ministries, Dallas, Texas. Introduction. My dear reader, with lines forming outside the psychiatrist's office, Christian psychologists working into the night, and pastors adding counselors to their staffs, it is obvious there are many people who need help. This book is not meant to replace counselors or to refute their usefulness, but to give some simple insights that may arrest an irritation in its infancy before it grows into a situation that needs outside help. We'd like to take care of our own problems and live in harmony with our family and friends, but somehow we don't know where to start. We've been told Christians shouldn't have any problems, and they should be prosperous, so our failure is often coupled with guilt. Many of us have tried so hard to be all things to all people that we are not sure who we are. Is this the real me or what I've learned to be? Am I as an adult still struggling to become what Mother had in mind for me? Have I blended so completely with my mate that I can't recognize an independent thought when I have one? Am I wearing a mask to hide the anger bubbling below the surface? Am I not clear as to what parts of my personality are genuine, or what traits are responses to the adversities of life? In the past 20 years of study, speaking, and writing, I have attempted to discover who I really am and to share these insights with others. In addition, I have set out to uncover the roots of my personality tree to find out where my traits originated and to observe where my own feelings were suppressed, repressed, or depressed. In this book, you will find out who you really are and begin to see why others function as they do. Those of you who have read Personality Plus or How to Get Along with Difficult People, you will find new, additional, and deeper information, and those of you for whom this concept is new will have an eye-opening experience which could change your self-image and your ability to get along with others. Let's have an exciting adventure as we laugh, think, and occasionally cry together. Take my hand as I guide you along the path of personal wisdom and insight. You will discover who you really are, uncover the roots of your personality tree, and recover the original spark and spirit that God intended you to have. With love and anticipation, Florence Littauer. Wisdom is a tree of life to those who embrace her. Those who lay hold of her will be blessed. Proverbs 3:18. Part 1. Discover the real you and aim to heal you. Discover. To obtain for the first time sight or knowledge of a thing existing already but not perceived or known. Our aim in this book is to examine ourselves in a new way, not just on the surface, not just as we appear to be to others, not just as Mother wanted us to be. By looking at our inborn desires, our underlying needs, and our repressed emotions, our eyes will be opened, and we will obtain, perhaps for the first time, some insight about who we really are. There is no magic wand to transform us into angels, but as we look at ourselves as God created us to be and come before Him in honesty, He will touch us with His healing power. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. Proverbs 11:30. 1. Were you born like this? The question, "Who am I?" has been around since Adam wondered what dust he'd come from, and the serpent told Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of life so her eyes would be opened and she'd know who she really was. Throughout the centuries, people have been searching for a sense of identity and a feeling of worth. As a nation, we went through the pangs of new birth and the struggle to come out an independent personality. With liberty and justice for all, we attracted people from around the globe to a land where they would live happily ever after, but somehow, in our fairy tale endings, we lost a sense of who we were as individuals. As we grew up and began to look at ourselves, we didn't like the confusion we saw. The 60s brought an unpopular war and the beginnings of a national sense of self-examination. Who are we and how did we get ourselves into these problems? Sociologists named the 70s the decade of depression, a discouraging and defeated time when the ME generation realized that in spite of their quest to find themselves, to do their own thing, and to search for their inner consciousness on a higher plane, they still didn't know who in the world they were. Months of mystical meditation didn't seem to stir up a life-changing thought. Peace marches had not produced peace, and the flower children had lost their petals. President Carter, looking downhearted himself, declared we were in a national malaise, and that announcement depressed the rest of us. As the 80s crept in, we began to wonder if we would ever find ourselves, and so we rushed out to sign up for courses in self-help, self-improvement, and self-actualization. We bought lifelong memberships in health spas, held hands in sensitivity groups, and gyrated around gypsy gurus. Surely the ME generation, who had dragged through the decade of depression, deserved a break today. But in spite of exercise and bean sprouts, we kept getting older. The sensitivity sisters showed little sensitivity beyond themselves, and the gurus were packed up and deported. What if we never got a grip on ourselves? What if we couldn't create heaven on earth? Fear gripped us, phobias replaced depression as the nation's #1 mental health problem, and the decade was dubbed the Age of Anxiety. What about you and me? We may not have drowned in depression or worried through our weeks, yet we tend to pick up the malaise and insecurities of others. We may be certain of life everlasting, but do we know who we are today? As I have taught leadership classes, I have found that education, money, prestige, or a big house do not ensure a feeling of worth. Even though we may have memorized Law 1, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, few of us seem to believe it. Yet it is true. God does love us and He has created us for a purpose. As David wrote to God in Psalm 139, "When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Verses 15 to 16. Yes, God knows us, and He wants us to understand ourselves, not to be worried or confused or depressed. He has made each one of us as a unique individual, and He uses our talents, personalities, and gifts for His good purpose. In the Bible, Joseph was intelligent, charming, well-dressed, and had a gift for interpreting dreams, yet his brothers were envious of his abilities, and they sold him as a slave. Because Joseph believed that God had an ultimate plan for him, he was able to stay optimistic even in difficult times, and people saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Genesis 39:3. Even when falsely accused and put in jail, Joseph kept his faith and behaved in such a manner that he rose to the prison's top position and cheered up those who were depressed. Later, those same personality traits that had disturbed his brothers were what found favor with Pharaoh and his gift of interpreting dreams saved the land. When his brothers came before him, he wept, forgave them, and relieved their fears. He told them not to feel guilty because what they had meant for evil, God had turned into good. God took Joseph's inborn traits, his personality and talents, and used him to save an entire nation and his own family. Esther was an exceptionally beautiful Jewish woman who was both exiled and orphaned. King Xerxes chose her to become his queen without knowing her heritage. Because of her godly behavior, she became a virtuous example to the other women and was dearly loved by her husband. When an order went out to kill all the Jews, she was used by God to persuade the king to change his mind. Her uncle Mordecai stated wisely, "Who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this?" Esther 4:14. God used Esther when she was willing and obedient to save the exiled Jewish race and her own family also. In the days of the New Testament, when God was ready to evangelize the world, he needed someone who was a Jewish Christian who spoke and wrote Greek and who understood Roman law. He chose Paul, who, while he had never taken any charm courses or self-improvement seminars, fit the job description. He was raised in a Jewish home, was educated as a Hebrew scholar, and was both a Pharisee and a member of the Sanhedrin. He spoke and wrote Greek, understood the classical intellect, and had studied philosophy. Because the people of Tarsus had been cooperative with the conquering Pompey, he had granted them Roman citizenship, thus making Paul a citizen with an understanding of Latin, plus a comprehension of Roman law, its government, and the military. All God had left to do was knock Paul to the ground, bring him face to face with Jesus, and convert him to Christ. Paul might not be acceptable in the Christian pastorate today, but God saw a man for all seasons, and he had a plan for his life. When Winston Churchill was called to be Prime Minister of England, as the European continent was falling prey to Hitler's greed, he proclaimed, "My entire life has been but a preparation for this very hour." On his 18th birthday, Churchill summed up his contribution to his country by saying, "It was the nation and the race dwelling all round the globe that had the lion's heart. I had the luck to be called upon to give the roar." How about you? What has God called upon you to do? Do you know that God wants to use your personality, your background, your abilities, your gifts for His glory? He created you for such a time as this, but He wants you to know who you really are, so that you will be a genuine and sincere person, not the one hiding behind a mask of confusion. You may ask, do I have to sign up for some course or move to Jerusalem? No. Just read on, enjoy discovering your true self by uncovering the roots of your family's personality tree. During the decade of depression and age of anxiety, I have been teaching people how to find themselves by using the strengths and weaknesses of the 4 basic personality patterns. Many have asked, were we born this way? This question has had sociologists working feverishly to ferret out the answers. They have tried to show us that environment is more important than heredity, that we are born as little blank pages for fate to write upon. We've been told that if you change a person's dwelling place or standard of living or put money in his pocket, you will change him. In spite of millions of dollars spent in moving people into new buildings, the experiment has failed. We are not all the same. God created each one of us as a unique individual, a blending from our parents whether we are observing hair and eye color or analyzing personality. In 1979, Dr. Thomas J. Bouchard, Jr. started a study in Minnesota of twins reared apart. Since then, researchers have examined 38 identical and 16 fraternal sets of twins reared apart. The tests measured the physical, psychological, and intellectual abilities. The results showed amazing similarities in choices of clothing, food, and names, not to mention parallels in medical, behavioral, and intelligence traits. Dr. David Lycan, a research team member, observes, much of what we think of as human individuality, temperament, and pace, and all the idiosyncrasies that make you different from your friends, may relate a lot more to your particular genetic individuality than we thought. The capacity for happiness seems to be more strongly genetically wired in than I had thought. Little Mary's sunny disposition may be part of her genetic makeup, enhanced by, but not the result of her adoring parents' care. The new thinking on old truths is that we are born as unique individuals. If we come prepackaged with certain blendings of our parents' personalities, isn't it our duty to the Lord to be as true to our basic traits as we possibly can? Shouldn't it be our goal to find out who we really are and take off any masks or pretenses that we may have put on for either self-preservation or a desire to be like someone else? Think back to your childhood, to how you felt about your parents, to how you related with your siblings, to how you reacted from the heart before you built walls of protection from the hurts of the world. Remember, you were made for such a time as this. Were you meant to be a sanguine? Were you a cheerful, bubbling, happy-go-lucky child? Did you avoid chores and somehow manage to find friends who were willing to bail you out? Did you have little buddies who wouldn't go anywhere without you and who thought everything you said was funny? Did you have one parent who was always trying to get you down to serious business, or one who couldn't understand why you wouldn't practice the violin? Did you get good marks in everything but conduct and penmanship? Then you are a sanguine whose chief aim in life is to have fun. Were you created to be a choleric? Were you in control of your family by the time you were 3 years old? Did you tell your mother what you would wear and refuse to put on what she had in mind? Were you able to observe from a young age that adults were bigger but not necessarily brighter? Did you get your schoolwork done faster than the others and then wonder what was wrong with them? Did you become captain of the teams and president of the clubs? Then you are a choleric, whose compelling desire in life is to have control. Were you designed to be a melancholy? Were you sensitive to your surroundings and easily moved to tears? Did you line up your toys in rows and go around shutting drawers that no one else seemed to notice were open? Did you do your homework on time and even enjoy research projects? Did you practice your piano piece until it was perfect, but not want to play it in the recital? Did you feel sorry for poor children and want to support the underdog in any situation? Did you get discouraged when things didn't work out the way you had in mind and no one else seemed to care? Then you are a melancholy whose hope is to someday have perfection, even though they may have been an impossible dream. Were you born to be a phlegmatic? Were you passive in your playpen and understanding if your bottle was overdue? Did your mother brag that you were a good baby and never gave her any trouble? Did you like naps? Did you do your schoolwork on time but not look for extra projects? Did you get nominated for vice president but not really care whether you were elected? Did you try to keep everyone happy and avoid getting in trouble? Then you are a phlegmatic whose desire is to have peace at any cost. The concept of the 4 basic temperaments is so easy to understand and quick to grasp that even a child can learn it. Brian Taylor from Temple, Texas, was 10 years old when he heard me speak on the temperaments. He brought his friends home to listen to my Personality Plus tapes, and later he did a school science project based on his personal analysis of his fellow students. For his project, this melancholy child made a chart entitled Questions Regarding Human Behavior. Each child in his class was asked to answer the following. Suppose a play were to be done at Meredith School. How would you want to be involved? 1. I would like to work backstage. Why? 2. I would like to be a student director. Why? 3. I would like to be cast in a leading role. Why? 4. I would not want to participate. Why? The questionnaire he showed me had been filled out by a student who wanted the leading role because it would be fun. From Brian's tabulations, there were 8 melancholies who wanted to work backstage, 15 cholerics who liked the idea of directing the others, 10 sanguines who all wanted to star, and 3 phlegmatics who didn't care to get involved. When I saw how simply Brian had taken my hours of teaching and reduced them down to 4 simple questions any 10-year-old could answer, I was impressed. I then asked him if he had won an award for his efforts, and he replied sadly, I would have, but they ran out of ribbons. Often we can tell a child's natural temperament pattern from an early age. My two grandsons came equipped with the same parents, Lauren and Randy, but with very different personalities. From the beginning, little Randy Jr. was melancholy with some choleric, neat, organized, and in charge. When I walk in the front door, Randy says, "Sit here, Grammy," and I do. He then brings me his second grade school papers and shows me 100% in spelling, including the word Hanukkah. As we sit seriously together, 4-year-old Jonathan, sanguine with some choleric, runs over the top of the coffee table in his Superman costume and is not content until he has disrupted our conversation on spelling and has managed to get Randy depressed. Last Christmas, Aunt Marita gave them a hamster named Ginger. Each boy was constantly opening the cage to see if Ginger was still alive, and often they would lose interest in her monotonous trip round and round on the exercise wheel and forget to shut the gate. Ginger, being bright, adventurous, and always hungry, would run away and look for food. One day, Laura had opened the trash compactor to drop in an empty cereal box and screamed when she saw the little beady eyes looking up from the darkness. It was Ginger, happily munching on stale crackers and missing death by a moment. Had Lauren turned the key without looking, little Ginger would have been as flat as a fur mitten. From then on, each time Ginger was missing, the boys would go to the trash compactor, and there she would be, bright-eyed and binging. One night, I called on the phone, and Randy Jr. said, "Have you heard the bad news? Ginger is dead." I could picture her flattened out among the boxes and cans, but Randy explained she died in her cage. I went to play with her and she was dead. He then delivered a fitting eulogy and gave me the details. In his melancholy way, he told me how he and his father had found a little box in the garage, lined it with paper towels, wrapped poor Ginger in tissue paper, taken the box to a far corner of the backyard and buried her. We had a funeral, he explained. We'll always remember poor dead Ginger. I was close to tears over his mournful musings of the memory of the hamster. When little Jonathan got on the phone, I said sadly, "I heard Ginger died." He replied, "Yep, she's dead all right." "Did you have a nice funeral for her?" I asked, giving him an opportunity to share his version of the tragedy. "No, we didn't have any funeral. We just dumped her in an old box with some clowns on it, stuck her in a hole on the ground, threw some dirt over her, and that's the end of Ginger." "Will you get a new one?" I asked. "Well, we might get another one, but if that one dies too, then it's bye-bye hamsters." I had to laugh over his simple, sanguine dismissal of Ginger's death as just one more event in a busy day while his melancholy brother was in mourning. What fun it is to understand others and have an explanation for their behavior. Our aim in studying the temperaments is to assess our basic strengths and realize that we are people of value and worth, to become aware of our weaknesses and set out to overcome them, to learn that just because other people are different doesn't make them wrong, and to accept the fact that since we can't change them, we might as well love them as they are. What pressure it takes off of us when we realize that we are not responsible for the behavior of those other people. How liberating it is when we realize God created us as unique individuals and we don't have to conform to someone else's image. As Pam Phillips wrote after listening to my tapes, "I have been amazed, thrilled, and set free by your teaching. The study of the temperaments is not a theology, but a tool to understanding ourselves and learning to get along with others. If the sun sets you free, you will be free indeed." John 8:36. For further study, thought, and action. We are free indeed to examine ourselves and reach for our full potential. Some of us may have the heart of a lion, while some are called upon to give the roar. As a first step, check off the traits on the quick quiz that sound the most like you. Remembering Brian's simple questions, what were you like as a child? Were you the sanguine who wanted to be a star and entertain the troops? Were you the choleric who innately seized control of every cast with or without having read the script? Were you the melancholy who would rather stay in the wings of life than stand on the center stage? Were you the phlegmatic who fled the smell of grease paint and the roar of the crowd but enjoyed watching? Throughout the book, to make the concept easier to grasp, I will use charts of the 4 kinds of personalities. In each case, the following letters representing the temperaments will be in the background. S for sanguine, C for choleric, P for phlegmatic, M for melancholy. To benefit the most from the growth of your personality tree, start a notebook in which you can begin to build a pattern of your personality from birth onto your childhood, educational years, career, and marriage up to the present. As you continue to read this book, you will be led to review your parents and grandparents and how they may have influenced your personality for the better or force you to play a role that was not your real self. By keeping notes on your answers and reactions, you will conclude with a broad view of yourself and your family. You will build a family tree based on each member's personality and see how they have affected each other and especially you. This would be a fascinating study to do either with your own family or with a group of friends. You may even want to add childhood pictures as you go along, or include letters and stories from relatives which shed light on who you really are. I have gathered childhood and ancestral pictures and have put together an album of my personality tree, plus wedding invitations, birth certificates, baptismal records, and business cards of relatives. Also, I've had slides of many old family pictures for the entertainment and edification of my children and for use in teaching the personality tree to others. I have framed one picture of each ancestor and have had them hanging on a family tree painted on a wall in my home. I hope these ideas stimulate you into examining your roots and creating your unique personality tree. Ask yourself the following questions, plus any others you create, and write down your answers. If you do this chapter by chapter, you will produce an amazing record, perhaps an autobiography for yourself and for your children. What is your full name, and where did it originate? From a grandmother, a TV star? What was your mother and father's initial reaction to your looks and sex at birth? Ask them or others who were around. What did they call you as a baby? Were you labeled as the smart one, the pretty one, the redhead, the dummy, the black sheep? List all the labels you can remember. Have any of these labels affected your opinion of yourself? Describe any type of participation in some memorable production of your youth. I remember trying out for the Rose and being chosen to play the cowslip. Do you have any pictures of you in costume? From what you've read so far, do you think you were born to be a sanguine who wants to have fun, a choleric who wants to be in control, a melancholy who wants everything to be perfect, a phlegmatic who wants to keep out of trouble and have peace? If you are planning your personality tree as a group study, have each person bring a baby picture, his or her baby book, and any mementos of interest for your next meeting. Discuss the previous questions and ideas and find out who you were born to be. This is the beginning of an exciting adventure. Memory is the diary that we all carry about with us. Chapter 2. What is your personality? You're just like Ruth, my mother would say to me in disgust. As a child, I had no idea why I was like Ruth, my mother's younger sister, who had been a talented violinist, had graduated from Boston University, and then eloped with a mechanic from Canada and disappeared from family view. I'd never seen Aunt Ruth, but the mere mention of her name would bring my petite phlegmatic grandmother to tears, as others would shake their heads and mumble in unison, "After all we did for her." Somehow, Aunt Ruth hadn't lived up to the family's image of her potential, and I didn't see how I was like her. I was only a child and I had no feel for the violin. Even though my mother had patiently taught me where to put my fingers and how to move the bow, after 2 years of lessons, I came across more as Jack Benny than Aunt Ruth. People laughed when I played, and finally Mother said to my dad, "Give her elocution lessons, for she has no talent." How could I be like Ruth if I failed at violin, hadn't been to college, and surely not eloped to Canada? One day, I was visiting at my grandmother's house in Merrimack, Massachusetts. A big semi-truck stopped out front. It was so huge it filled an entire width of Orchard Street. We ran to the window at the sound of the motor and saw a lady jump down from the cab. "It's Ruth," Grandma cried as she ran to the door. The Aunt Ruth, I wondered. Now I'll find out why I'm like her. I saw her pick up little grandma and swing her around. She laughed as she explained how she'd met this truck driver in Canada. He'd said he was driving to Massachusetts and she'd thrown on a few things in a paper bag and hopped in with him. Oh, you shouldn't have taken such a chance, Grandma reprimanded. Well, it was the only way I could afford to get home. Nothing went wrong, and we had so much fun on the drive down. Aunt Ruth turned and waved goodbye to her new best friend as he labored to turn his rig around at the end of Orchard Street and get onto the road again. He was such a nice man, she said with a feeling of nostalgia, while Grandma muttered, Well, I don't know about that. Who knows what could have happened to you? During the next few days, I watched Aunt Ruth's every move and listened to what she said and what the others said when she left the room. I found her fascinating, fun, but I could see how the family found her to be a rebel. Every time she went to the bathroom, cigarette smoke came wafting through the cracks and the keyhole. No one ever faced her with this sinful behavior, but whenever she'd head for the bathroom, the sisters would whisk Grandma out on the porch to look at the birds. Aunt Ruth always seemed to get by with things, as my mother put it, usually one of the many cliches her family lived by. I observed how Aunt Ruth charmed people into going along with her ideas, and how she would take mild criticism and turn it into humor. She made the very best of a not too positive situation, and I quietly admired her skill and personality. As I listened, I realized that Ruth had always been able to get away with murder, and that the others had often been left holding the bag, while Ruth would be sitting on her papa's lap telling him how much she loved him. My mother refreshed Ruth's memory. You may not recall, Ruth, but I took many spankings from Papa just to save your neck. Instead of thanking Mother for her sacrifice, Ruth put her head back and laughed heartily. I sure did know how to handle Papa. Mother sighed. Aunt Ruth was fun, and I felt sad when the truck driver returned to pick her up and Grandma cried, We'll probably never see her alive again. From then on, I took note of my comparisons with Ruth and saw that my mother would comment when I had wormed my way out of some trouble, or when someone would say I was a bundle of laughs. I remember years later when I was teaching at Haverhill High School and my brother Ron fixed me up with Phil at the Canada Dry salesman. As I was trying to impress him while placing an order for ginger ale, I looked out the store window and saw my new friend Dick, who had just returned from the war. As he parked his restored Model T at the curb, I excused myself and turned the order over to my mother while I slipped out and led Dick across the street to Miss Bartlett's front steps, where we sat to chat. After a few minutes, I ran back to the store to get something to drink for Dick. While pouring some Canada Dry, I took up with Phil where we left off and made a date for Friday. I brought the drink back to Dick on the steps and was back in time to say goodbye to Phil. As I poured some ginger ale for myself, my mother sighed. You're just like Ruth. Now that I look back upon the Florence-Ruth comparison with the knowledge of the different personalities, I see that my similarities had nothing to do with the violin or smoking, but with the emotional response I brought forth from my mother. She had unconsciously resented Ruth's ability to charm others, while she was charmed herself into defending Ruth's actions. She had disliked Ruth's personality, yet wished she were more like Ruth. She had been judging of Ruth's behavior, but had covered for her when the chips were down. Mother was primarily phlegmatic like her mother, quiet, withdrawn, and unwilling to take chances. She was also melancholy with the musical talent and ability to play and teach both violin and cello. She was always loyal to Ruth as melancholy is, and admired her charm, while the phlegmatic part of her was unwilling to ever confront Ruth on what she didn't like. The two of them had the typical differences of the phlegmatic melancholy, being unhappy but not daring to discuss it with the sanguine choleric, who enjoyed the family and was intensive to the inner feelings. Without knowing what I was doing as a child, I became like Ruth because we happened to have the same personality. I enjoyed giving my mother fits and constantly telling her to stop worrying and to have a good time. Once I asked her why she never gave me compliments, a deep sanguine need, and she replied, "You never know when you'll have to eat your own words." How I wish I now had understood my mother's cautious cliches and realized her need to be respected as a person of value, instead of me constantly seeking the praise she couldn't give me and trying to do dramatic things to make her sit up and take notice. People compare us with another member of our family tree, not only because of our looks, but because we somehow unwittingly elicit the same inner response of emotion. One particular pattern of personality brings out in others the same feelings they have for relatives or friends who are similar. According to my mother, my brother Ron, SC, is just like my father. She often said, "He takes such good care of me and he's always fun, but if you cross him up, watch out." My daughter Lauren, C, is just like Aunt Sadie. She's talented and brilliant, but she controls the family and you'd better step to it when she says so. My daughter Marita, SC, is just like me and Aunt Ruth. She's always rushing around to do too much, but somehow it always comes out all right in the end. My grandson Randy, MC, is just like my husband Fred, and little Jonathan, SC, looks like his father, but is just like Marita. How my mother loved to sit back quietly, assess our family's aggressive behavior, and sigh, "You're just like Ruth." Although mother came to our Personality Plus seminars, every time I tried to get her to do personality profile, she'd shake her head and say, "It just sounds like too much work." How grateful I am to know that her response is not a condemnation of my teaching temperaments, but a typical phlegmatic reaction to an analysis that might suggest change in fear of an unknown theory that might put her in a negative light. Well, mother always said, "What you don't know won't hurt you." One woman whose family was changed through an understanding of the different personalities wrote the following in a letter. "Your Personality Plus revolutionized our lives at the very least. Our family was loving, but discordant until you made us realize what our different personalities meant. I believe your temperament study may be possibly God's answer to the horoscope. When someone mentions his sign, I explain the temperaments. Thank you for this gentle witnessing tool. In his love, Phyllis Beaver, Pearsall, Texas." In these days of soul-searching, what a blessing it is to understand our personality strengths and weaknesses and to trace them back to some other Aunt Ruths hanging on the family tree. How about you? Are you just like your Aunt Ruth, your Uncle Ethan, or your grandpa? Where can we find out who we really are? The philosophical Socrates said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom." Aldous Huxley explained, "There is only one corner of the universe you can be certain of improving, and that is your own self." But how? One summer, when Fred and I were vacationing in Maine and chatting about nutrition while eating blueberry pancakes, a sanguine man sitting nearby said, "My doctor diagnoses by computer." "How does he do that?" I asked, surprised at the sudden interjection. "He's made out a big questionnaire that took me over an hour to fill out. It asks things like, are you overweight? If yes, do you eat too much? Do you enjoy Mars bars, chocolate malts, hot fudge sundaes? Are you happy with how you look? What have you done to remedy this problem? What do you intend to do about it in the future?" By the time I'd answered the questions, I'd solved my own problems. As I thought about this method of medical self-analysis, I realized that many of us could solve our own problems if we had some suggested guidelines, and if we take the time to think before we ran off to the doctor or counselor. Aside from the administering of drugs, the doctor spends much of his time in listening to piecemeal problems and then making calculated prescriptions based on his intuition, education, and experience. If we withhold specific information, his assumption may be incorrect. One girl who has been in therapy for months told me, "I never told the counselor how I really feel because I'm afraid she won't like me." How can the counselor possibly give accurate advice when the subject gives a distorted view of her life? How much better it would be if we, who know ourselves well, could search for truth in our innermost parts. It was 20 years ago that my husband Fred and I began an informal study of the 4 basic temperaments. At first we looked at the concept lightly and initially used it as a parlor game by inviting friends into our home to play personality. Fred made a quick chart for us all to check off, and we took his test together. We had such fun that everyone asked if we could do it again. The next week, as we gathered, the conversation was high-pitched and excited. Quiet people were sharing how learning about themselves had opened up their eyes, and how they were beginning to look at others in a new light. People who usually wanted to laugh and play could hardly wait to get down to business. As we met that second time, Fred and I saw living proof that when people had some simple tool that explained their behavior, they could immediately put their new information into practice. We saw in 1 week's time a new understanding between husband and wives, a release of tension and self-judgment, and a new freedom to be what God wanted each one to be. Our parlor game turned into a time of mutual self-analysis, and as we began to find ourselves and accept those who were different, our group transformed from some people who saw each other in church on Sundays to a close Christian fellowship who loved each other and became emotionally supportive. Since that first experience, Fred and I have taught the temperaments to thousands of people and have seen so many lives changed by a simple understanding of strengths and weaknesses brought before the Lord for His transforming power. Although there are many other types of personality analysis, I've found that the basic theory came from Hippocrates 2,000 years ago. His terms have been modified and relabeled many times, but their usefulness and validity remain the same today as they were in ancient Greece. Temperament is a term from the Latin, meaning a mixing in due proportion. What they were mixing were fluids or humors, from the Latin word for moisture. A person with a lot of red blood coursing through his veins was a sanguine, cheerful, outgoing, and optimistic, but not very serious or organized. The original choleric had too much yellow bile, making him bilious, short-tempered, and ill-natured, but giving him a dynamic desire for action. As his chol, Greek for bile, was mixed in due proportion, he charged into leadership positions. Too much melas, Greek for black, and chol added up to melancholy, deep, sad, and depressive, but also a thoughtful, gifted, and analytical genius. Phlegm was a cold, moist humor which caused people to be slow and sluggish, but enabled them to stay calm, cool, and collected under pressure and heat. According to Michael Gartner, writing about the original concept, if you had too much of any one humor, you were considered unbalanced, a little odd, or eccentric. Sometimes, normal folks would laugh at their friends with too much of a humor, and that's how the word humor got its present-day meaning of ludicrous, comical, or absurd. When Mark Antony spoke of the murdered Julius Caesar, he proclaimed his personality as a perfect blending. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed him in that nature might stand up and say to all world, "This was a man." How are the elements mixed in you? Bishop Ernest A. Fitzgerald writes, "Wise is the person who wrestles for self-understanding. Life can be wasted in anxiety over the lack of certain abilities or talents. The wishing well syndrome is futile and destructive to our well-being. An intelligent analysis of self, however, and the determination to be the best we can be, make for exciting and healthy living. There are really no inferior people. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. When we utilize our strengths and weaknesses, we are minimized." As we counsel using the temperament strengths to encourage and the weaknesses to point out areas for growth and improvement, we are still amazed at how quickly a person can see himself in the examples we use and choose to change. In Champaign, Illinois, my husband Fred met with Terry Redenor. Terry did not understand why he was having certain relationship problems. He was predominantly choleric, strong and successful, but typically unable to see any possible weaknesses. Terry had been seeking answers, but until he saw his own problem areas, he couldn't imagine why his sincerity had not been enough. Later, Terry wrote us in gratitude for our introducing him to the basic temperaments of human nature. I now know that many of my frustrations and searchings over the past 3 years were perhaps of my own doing. I needed to hear the things that Fred and I discussed Saturday morning. To hear those things and to realize that I was not the only one experiencing such frustration gave me extreme encouragement. However, true to a choleric, now that I know what the problems are, I have set a goal and I will be successful. I pray that I can continue to improve my temperament weaknesses and that God will use the experiences in my life in the last 3 years to help support others. Your friendship will be a constant reminder to listen to the Lord and to let my weaknesses become strengths in the Lord. In these times of global tension and inner turmoil, I find many Christian people who are longing for some sense of identity and self-worth, some answers to their frustrations and searchings as Terry expressed. They study the Word. They know they are created in God's image and made slightly lower than the angels. They've been crucified in Christ and have taken off the old clothes and put on the new. They've gone to church, knelt at the altar on Sunday, and taught Bible studies. In spite of all these positive spiritual steps, they still need some simple solution to who they really are as individuals. After these 20 years of studying and teaching the temperaments, I am still amazed at how God uses this tool to open people's eyes to themselves and their relationship with others. A young lady wrote how my putting the temperaments into real-life people's situations was what changed her life. Thank you for being available and touchable. We now have such insight in dealing with my Fred's wretched melancholy father. Oh, what freedom for Fred at age 37 to realize he will never be able to reach his dad's standards. For me to now understand why my precious phlegmatic melancholy dad drank himself into an early grave at 66 after living with my choleric mom all those years. We could go on for hours and still not be able to express to you and to your Fred our thanks for your countless hours of preparation, for your willingness to be used of God in such a mighty way. Another girl came to our class, the Christian Leaders and Speakers seminars, and just gave her name as D. When we asked what her last name was, she said, "I don't have one because I don't know who I am." Later, after hearing our explanation of the personalities, she wrote that at first she had listened intellectually, but now the information had gone from her head to her heart. The Lord really impressed these truths upon me along with Romans 8:1-2. I now feel no condemnation, and the law of the Spirit of life has set me free. Among her other comments, she explained, "Remember I told you that I have no last name? That's because I've had 4 marriages, and my mother was married 3 times. I've had a total of 7 last names. Who am I anyway? You should have seen the fiasco at my daughter's wedding when everyone showed up. Thank you so much for all you've given me. It is more blessed to give than to receive. D." As I have taught the use of the temperaments to churches, medical conventions, leaders and speakers, couples and families, businesses and other groups, I have been frequently asked how the original terms compare with other personality tests or systems. In an attempt to answer questioning minds, I have read, gathered, and sometimes taken different forms of analyses. It would fill a book to report on all the theories I've examined, so I have made a chart. Yes, I, as sanguine choleric, have made a melancholy chart comparing the different terms used. The one overwhelming conclusion I've come to is that no matter what the traits are labeled, they all seem to spring from the same rootstock of Hippocrates' theory of the humors. Few of the new theory originators make this connection, and in several articles about testing, the announcement is made about an exciting new concept. While this new concept has been around for over 2,000 years, it can always take on a fresh face with new labels, and I'm sure many of the current testers may sincerely think they thought it all up. For further study, thought, and action. Oswald Chambers, in My Utmost for His Highest, says, "Personality is that peculiar, incalculable thing that is meant when we speak of ourselves as distinct from everyone else. Our personality is always too big for us to grasp. Because it is too big for us to grasp, we need to break our personality into chunks we can ingest with ease. Are you beginning to get a grasp of who you are? As you prepare to trace the roots of your own personality tree, you will want to have an understanding first of your own blending of the humors. By adding this knowledge to the perception your family already has of you, you will begin to piece together the puzzle of your personality. If you are in a group study, go around the room and have each person share what he has learned about himself so far. Don't allow others, such as mates, to correct or second guess each person's opinions, or this will stifle meaningful conversation. Each person must be free to express his feelings without fear of judgment. What a great way to get acquainted with others on an emotional as well as a social level. Think about those people in your family who are alike. In your personality notebook, list those that come to mind, and then beside the names, jot down the personality similarities, both strengths and weaknesses. Discuss these individuals with any family member available in order to garner information. As you plant these seeds of thought in your mind, you will begin to water your seedlings with additional material, as you are alert to any reference made to your Aunt Ruth's. If you're using your personality tree as a group study, bring your list of comparisons and be ready to share your results. There's no way we can carry on a positive tradition or eliminate repeated weaknesses until we bring them to light to take an objective look at them. You will be amazed at the information there is available when you begin to seek. Older family members are flattered when you ask them to fill in your memory blanks, and even family friends may have nostalgic stories they would love to tell. In placing these personalities of the past, think about how each individual approached projects. What was their way? Commit your way to the Lord. Psalm 37:5. The Lord delights in the way of the man whose steps he has made firm. Psalm 37:23. Chapter 3. What are your desires and underlying needs? Without an understanding of the basic temperaments and the desires and needs of each, we tend to spend much of our time trying to get from other people responses that they just can't give. Many marriages, for example, come to a grinding halt because neither partner knows what the other one wants or needs. With no simple tool to use, success is an accident. Once we begin to understand the basic desire of each nature, however, the veil is lifted and we have the key to getting along with others. What are your desires? The sanguine from the beginning wants to have fun. Accepting this fact will keep us from false expectations that someday he or she will grow up and get down to business. My phlegmatic mother, after spending a week with my brother Ron, top radio personality in Dallas, Texas, and proclaimed in the Dallas Morning News as the one who owns the morning, said with a sigh, "I wonder if Ron will ever grow up and get a real job." She doesn't understand that a sanguine doesn't want to grow up, that his aim is to have fun, and that he is at the top of his profession. The choleric wants to have control and is only comfortable when he has choreographed the cast of his world and has it completely under his inspired direction. Knowing this fact will prevent us from staging a struggle for power, which we would probably lose. The melancholy's desire is to have perfection. To know what that is, we have to enter into his perfectly organized and categorized mind and see the situation with his eyes. When we realize he cannot relax until life is in order, we can make a conscious effort to meet his standards. The phlegmatic's aim in life is to stay out of trouble and keep peace. He will not become enthusiastic about anything or take any chances, so don't push him and think you can alter his personality. All that badgering him will do is increase his resistance to change. When we see and accept that each temperament has a different desire in life, we can function out of knowledge and not ignorance. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Matthew 10:16. Sanguines, have fun. Heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop, but a good work maketh it glad. Proverbs 12:25. When we realize the sanguine's desire for fun, we can perhaps grasp why things that would embarrass others are positive experiences for the sanguine. As I tell my story of losing my car in the 7-story parking garage, melancholies and cholerics shake their heads in disbelief. Phlegmatics somewhat understand the possibility, and sanguines get so excited they can hardly wait to rush up to me with the tales of their own losses. Several ladies have detailed how they lost their cars at Disneyland and had to wait until midnight when the place emptied out to find them. One sanguine, who went to the Cotton Bowl for the New Year's game, wanted to make sure she wouldn't get lost. She wrote down bus number 104 on the back of an envelope so she would know which bus was hers when she returned. What she had not anticipated was that there were hundreds of buses lined up and she had no idea which one was number 104. I would have been there yet, she exclaimed in typical sanguine exaggeration, if a friend hadn't found me gasping from the exhaust fumes and it led me to bus number 104. An adorable sanguine girl told me that her husband brought home a client for dinner. As she was preparing the meal, she discovered she was missing a key ingredient. She didn't want her melancholy husband to know, since he constantly criticized her lack of organization, so she tiptoed to the front door. As she looked out, she saw the client's car was behind hers in the driveway, and that she would have to go ask him to move it. But wait, there were his keys on the table, so why not quietly take his car? She parked in the large lot outside the supermarket, and when she came out, she not only didn't know where she'd parked, she didn't have any idea what kind of car it was. All she could remember was that there was a letter on the front seat, and the only reason she recalled that was because she'd read it. She pushed her cart up and down lanes, peering into each car, looking for the letter, which she ultimately found. She got home safely, and no one ever needed to know, but in typical sanguine fashion, when there was a long pause in the business conversation, she felt led to entertain the client with her escapade of taking his car without permission and reading his letter. Much to her surprise, he didn't find it humorous, and her husband was both humiliated and incensed. A sanguine receptionist came out after work, and her 1967 gold Dodge was gone. She called the police, filled out all the forms, and asked the policeman to drive her home. When they pulled into the driveway, the man asked, "Do you have two 67 gold Dodges?" "No. Why?" "Because there's one sitting here in front of us." She looked up in wide-eyed surprise. "Oh, I guess I forgot. My girlfriend drove me to work this morning." One lady told me she was hunting for her keys at the cleaners and concluded, "I must have left them at church." The phlegmatic cleaner said half under his breath, "If you left them at the church, how did you get the car here?" A girl from Fairbanks, Alaska, sent me this story after I spoke there in September of '85. I went to the supermarket for a few quick items, but as I walked the aisles, I decided I might as well shop. By the time I wandered the aisles with payday's bulk in my purse, I had a cart chock full of meals. I also had a reduced for winter Boston fern drooping atop the edibles. Throughout the checkout stand, $158 later, I pushed my laden cart into the parking lot. Adrenaline pumped as I went row by row, puzzling over why I couldn't remember where I'd parked. Still puzzled, I pushed the cart, topped by my Boston fern, back towards the store. The outside of the store was being painted by a crew on scaffolding. As I dodged their equipment with my unwieldy cart, I saw it. Beneath the tarp sat my yellow 10-speed bike. I had biked the 5 miles today. Now, as a newly single parent whose ex-husband was out of town, who was in the proud stage, too proud to call on a friend, I began packing. Groceries into boxes stacked on the back rack, cord tying the Boston fern pot firmly atop the boxes, 4 loaves of bread tied by their ends to the handlebars. I rode all the way home on a bike that was ready to flip over at every little bump. My daughter saw me come up, looking like a gypsy caravan. How did I feel? How did they feel? Resourceful, capable, independent. My very favorite episode is the lady from Newport Beach who went shopping at the vast South Coast Plaza. When she came out of Bullock's, her car was gone. After hunting around by herself, she called the security guard who drove her up and down each row in the entire set of parking lots. There was no question, they both agreed, the car had been stolen. She filled out the forms and later filed an insurance claim. When she received the money, she brought a bright new car and liked it even better than the first one. Later, she received a phone call from Sears. Hey lady, when are you gonna come back to pick up your car that you left here a month ago for us to rotate the tires? If you don't come soon, we're gonna charge you for storage. Many Sanguines have sent me car stories, but just as many Melancholys have mailed me detailed information for forgetful Sanguines on where to buy a keyring that beeps when you clap your hands, or a car finder which only costs $99.95. These inventions were surely made for Sanguines, and if they become popular, could eliminate this Sanguine habit as surely as smallpox was eradicated. One ad stated confidently, "Spot your parked car instantly. Misplaced your car in a crowded parking lot? Touch the car finder and your car will honk its horn and flash its lights so you can locate it at once. Car finder is a miniature transmitter that attaches to any keychain. When you push the button, your car answers up to 750 feet away." I knew the gadget was for sociable Sanguines when the ad concluded, "The car finder is a real friend with user-friendly instructions." So that you Sanguine men won't think these stories leave you out, here's an episode from my favorite minister of music, Jim Lacey, after his move to Columbus, Ohio. Sanguine Jim and Melancholy Sherry went to a church Christmas party. Since they were new in town and hadn't become acquainted, Sherry was a little nervous about making a good first impression. Jim had the map to the people's home on Angela Street, and Sherry was comforted when a car with some friends she recognized honked as they drove by. Since Jim had a quick errand to run at the church, he dropped Sherry off at the curb where she joined some others who were heading into the party. Being new to the church and trying to be as outgoing as possible, Sherry greeted the hostess at the door and drifted into the room full of chatting couples. She stood by herself and observed that the new guests were all bringing wedding presents. She wondered why they were bringing these to the church Christmas party, and when she asked, the hostess replied, "This is no church Christmas party. This is a wedding reception. Are you supposed to be here?" Sherry was so embarrassed that she got her coat and left, just as Jim was driving up, oblivious to the fact he'd dumped her out at the wrong party. While Jim laughed, Sherry went into a depression. When they got to the right house down the street, Sherry made Jim go in and make sure first. She begged him not to tell a soul, but in true Sanguine fashion, Jim made a comedy act of the whole episode. He wrote to me, "I told everyone, including my Sanguine choir. What fun." Yes, what fun, when the Sanguine tells his own story of his own error depressing his own wife. The Sanguine's aim is to have fun. Cholerics, have control. Sink the heathen into the pit, catch their feet in thy net, execute proper judgment. Psalm 9:15-16. The choleric's basic desire is to be in control. A choleric woman told me about the battle she was having with her choleric 10-year-old son. Every day after he goes to school, she goes in and moves the furniture in his room into the position where she and the decorator want it. The first thing he does when he comes home is change it all back to the way he likes it. She maintains it's her house and she has the right to put the furniture wherever she wants it. Besides, what if her friends came to visit and the room wasn't in order? He, being a chip off the old block, claims his room as his territory where he has the right to arrange it whatever way he wants. Here are two cholerics fighting so hard for control that they're playing Mayflower movers every day. I shared with her how important it is for a choleric child to be in control of something at home, for if he is thwarted there, he will likely go out and beat up his friends. With this new thought in mind, she went home to make peace. A choleric man who sold medical supplies to doctors told me how he hated his job. When I asked him why he continued, he said, "I make a lot of money and I like what I'm doing." "How can you hate it and like it?" I asked. He thought for a minute and concluded, "I like the job, but I hate the fact that I'll never be the boss." Here was a choleric in a good position but chafing because he had to play second fiddle and couldn't see any possibility of being in charge. Another choleric salesman told me about his stupid Sanguine boss. She never gets anything done right and she spends most of her time on the phone. I tell her each day what she's doing wrong and how to improve, but she never gets any better. I reviewed our lesson with him. What does a Sanguine desire in life? Fun. What does a Sanguine need more than anything else? Attention and approval. Now that you know this, think about your situation. Let's pretend I'm your boss and everyone tells me I'm fun to be around. Each day they all compliment me, bring me little presents, and listen to my every word. You, however, try to straighten me out each day and criticize my time on the phone. I get a memo from above that instructs me to lay off one of my salesmen. How long is it going to take me to decide which one it should be? He got the point. A choleric lady remembers when, as a child, she played war with the neighborhood boys. They wanted me to be the nurse since I was the only girl, but I said, "No, I'll be the general," and I was. A choleric man told his phlegmatic wife, "I hate hard-headed people." She dared venture, "Sometimes you are hard-headed." He snapped back, "Only when I'm right." Another choleric man told me, "I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong." Even the choleric disciples were scrapping for control. There was strife among them which of them should be accounted the greatest. Luke 22:24. A choleric doctor took the personality profile, and I observed him checking off all the strengths and none of the weaknesses. I commented on this to him, and he replied, "That's because I have all strengths and no weaknesses, but I'll be glad to check off a few weaknesses if it'll make you happy." Oh, noble man. Later he came up to me and said, "I thought it over and I do have one weakness. I seem to always choose weak, sniveling nurses. They seem normal to start with, but they get worse. Just this morning when I walked into the office, they all flattened against the wall and began to cry. I asked them what was the matter, and they said that they were afraid of me. I let them know right off it was their own fault. If you do what I told you to do when I told you to do it, you'd have no reason to be afraid." What compassion and understanding! The cholerics not only want to be in control, but as you can see, they have the ability to catch even a glimpse of their weaknesses. They have the greatest bent for leadership, but a blind spot in seeing how they affect other people. They agree with Robert Service. This is the law of the Yukon, that only the strong shall thrive, that surely the weak shall perish, and only the fit survive. The choleric's aim is to have control. Melancholies have protection. I am weary of groaning. I make my bed to swim. I water my couch with tears. I cry with grief. Psalm 6, 6-7. How weary the melancholy is from trying to get life in order, watering the couch with tears and crying with grief. From the time the melancholy can stand up and move around, he is trying to make the crooked path straight. My melancholy son, Fred, was tidying up the house as soon as he could get out of his playpen, and he started collecting and sorting laundry when he was 2. He's been my housekeeper for years, and if I leave something on the kitchen counter, he quickly puts it in the nearest drawer. Since I can't remember where I left it, this disappearance causes me quite a surge as I tear through the kitchen drawers looking for a lace slip he stuck in with the dish towels. A melancholy pastor told me how, as a child, he kept all of his games in order, numbered each box, and had a master list posted in his closet. He never lost so much as a puzzle piece in his whole childhood. When he had his own children and gave them his well-preserved games to play with, they had all the parts messed up within a week. How could I have kept them perfect for all those years and see them wreck the whole system in less than a week? A sanguine girl told me her melancholy husband has rebuilt her closet 3 times in hopes he'll strike the right plan which will make her keep it neat. If only he knew the temperaments, he could save his time and money. No matter what plan he has, she'll still throw the shoes in a pile on the floor. Another girl wrote, "My melancholy husband keeps his side of the closet in perfect order with all his pants folded exactly the same. You can imagine what my side looks like. He even gets bothered when I don't put the shampoo and cream rinse bottles back on the rack with the labels facing forward in perfect order. It took him 6 months to tell me that this bothered him." One melancholy man kept a mileage chart on his shoes from the time he bought them until he gave them away to the Salvation Army. He found out when he divided the cost of the shoes by the number of days he wore them that the shoes had cost him 9 cents a day. Only a melancholy would care. Another man dates every light bulb in his house at the time of purchase. This way he is able to keep a record of each bulb and know the exact length of service. A girl at class, Christian leaders and speakers seminars, took her personality profile and divided it into percentages, proving she was 82.5% melancholy. Not that we needed proof. One father kept a file box on all of his son's dates with full family background and his candid opinion of each one. The girl that married him was not pleased when she found her report that said, "Surely he won't marry this one." A girl in Florida sent me this account of the man next door. The tire on one of their trash can carriers broke. The husband replaced it, however he noticed that it didn't match the other trash can carrier tires. To him, that was unthinkable. So he immediately ran out and brought 3 new tires for the trash can carrier and replaced the non-matching but perfectly good tires. To top it all off, this husband realized that if one of the new tires became defective and had to be replaced, he might not locate a matching tire, which would necessitate starting all over again. So he bought a second set of tires for each machine and stored them in his impeccably neat garage. His wife said that one broken tire cost him $250 because of her husband's concern for matching everything. Guess which type personality he is. All melancholies would agree with Ludwig van Beethoven. Then let us all do what is right, strive with all our might toward the unattainable, develop as full as we can the gifts of God has given us, and never stop learning. The melancholy's aim is to have perfection. Phlegmatics, have peace. Lay me down in peace to sleep, make me dwell in safety. Psalm 4:8. The phlegmatic's desire is to lie in peace and dwell in safety, while the sanguine has the compulsion to have fun, and the choleric has a compulsion to control everything and everyone in life, and the melancholy has an almost fanatical compulsion to get things in perfect order. The phlegmatic has no compulsions. They will avoid problems whenever possible and quietly face those they can't get around. When the melancholy says I have to think about it, he really thinks about it, but the phlegmatic uses this expression to postpone action. It isn't that he wants to think, it's that he doesn't want to act. One lady who was taking me out to dinner asked her phlegmatic husband for his decision on where to go. Are we still thinking about it, or are we ready to do it? A phlegmatic man told me, I'm not lazy, I'm just conservative on my energy level. A phlegmatic woman shared, I married a phlegmatic, and our baby was so phlegmatic it was like she was born in a coma. Making decisions is difficult for the phlegmatic. I love the paperweight on a phlegmatic's desk that carries the message, maybe, and that's final. A greeting card showed a phlegmatic tiger draped over an easy chair. On the inside it said, get up before they make a rug out of you. Because the phlegmatics desire peace, they are easy to manipulate and frequently find themselves pushed around by cholerics who need someone to control. Although they usually will take whatever is handed out, once in a while, to keep peace with themselves, they will refuse to conform and they will hold their ground. The last Christmas we had with my little phlegmatic mother was one to remember. Her choleric sister Jean, my favorite aunt, came out to California bringing a special present for Mother from all her friends at the church gift shop. As Mother was carefully unwrapping the present in such a way to preserve the paper for next year, Aunt Jean spoke up. This is a very special present. Your friends made this by hand for you, and you will love it. As Mother took a look, Aunt Jean continued, That is an apron made of unbleached muslin and edged in red bias binding. Cholerics somehow feel phlegmatics are not bright enough to know an apron when they see one, muslin from satin or red from green. Written all over the apron in liquid embroidery are all your friends' names. See them right there. They all sat down and signed the apron so that every time you wear it you will think of them. Mother quietly stated, I won't wear this apron. It's too good to use. What do you mean you won't wear this apron? Do you think I'm going back to the gift shop and tell them after all their time and effort you wouldn't even wear the apron? Lauren on the other side of Mother said firmly, You will wear this apron. In fact, right after Christmas dinner, you will put it on to do the dishes. As Mother folded it back up, Aunt Jean added, I didn't drag this apron all the way out here on the plane from Massachusetts to have you refuse to wear it. Lauren affirmed to Aunt Jean, She will wear it. I'll see to it. Mother put the cover on the box and said softly, "I will not wear this apron." Lauren and Aunt Jean, two cholerics having trouble with their control, said in harmony, "You will wear that apron." A month later, when I was conducting a Personality Plus conference in Dallas, Mother was sitting right in the front row. As I was speaking, I wondered if I dared to tell the story about Mother and the apron. I remember thinking, well, she's 85. She can't hate me for too long. I took the big chance and went through the whole scene, ending with, "And Mother said I won't wear that apron." Much to my absolute amazement, Phlegmatic Mother stood up, turned to the crowd, and stated clearly, "And I didn't." They loved her and gave her a rousing ovation. Later, when I commended her performance, I told her, "You ought to be the speaker. I spoke all day, and you got an ovation on one line." She gave me a little phlegmatic shrug, and I could tell in her terms that she was pleased as punch. 2 months later, as she had desired, she died peacefully in her sleep to join the Prince of Peace and Lord of Lords. She never did wear that apron. The phlegmatic's aim is to have peace. What are your underlying needs? As each one of us has certain aims and desires, so also do we have underlying needs that we don't always communicate clearly to others. We think if they really loved us, they would know what we needed, but unfortunately we tend to give what we want to receive and then wonder why we don't get it back. Fred loves colognes, so he's constantly buying me perfume to make me happy. I don't have as keen as a sense of smell. I have more bottles than I could ever empty, and I keep forgetting to put the perfume on. Therefore, whenever he gives me another new spray, I don't get too excited. He takes that to mean I don't appreciate his thoughtfulness. Because he has such a collection of colognes, I never think of buying him more, but in his mind he could never have too many. In his romantic heart, I am neither caring nor grateful, but I see my attitude as practical. I had no idea that fragrance was an issue until one night after I had ignored a new bottle. Fred stated clearly, "I will never buy you any perfume again. You don't even notice what I give you." That caught my attention. As we discussed the situation, and I apologize for my callousness, we agree that he was attempting to meet a need I didn't have in hopes it would spur me into meeting his for him. He needed sentimental signs that I loved him, and I had figured there was no point in buying more of what he already had in abundance. We were at the perfume stalemate, and I didn't recognize our opposite needs. To prevent this type of problem in your life, or to heal some underlying wounds of which you may not be aware, sit down with your mate and ask, "What needs do you have that I'm not meeting?" Listen, take notes, and don't be defensive. Thank him, and if he shows interest, share one or two things that you would appreciate from him. The sanguine needs attention and approval. By learning the underlying needs of each temperament, you will have an advantage in your human relationships. While the sanguines want to have fun in life and appear to have no serious requirements for happiness, underneath they have a craving for approval. They need to know they are acceptable in your sight. They feed on compliments, and criticism wounds them deeply. Usually they are married to melancholies who see no reason to give praise to something that is not done properly in the first place, and who feel constant criticism will provide positive motivation. How pitiful it is to realize how many couples are sitting in this stalemate, neither one meeting the other's need. The sanguine needs approval, and will wilt into usefulness under negative comments. Given praise and encouragement, the sanguine will go to extremes to please you, for they want to be loved. When Marita and I come home from a trip, Fred asks, "How did it go?" We reply in unison, "They loved us." Only sanguines would be this presumptuous even in humor. Once, Fred questioned us, "Did the people say they loved you in so many words?" "Well, no, we just know they did." The melancholy often won't believe compliments when they are verbalized, but the sanguine will make positive assumptions even when no one said a word. My little sanguine grandson, Jonathan, stood on the edge of the pool and stated loudly, "My mommy loves me, my daddy loves me, Grammy loves me, Papa loves me." He added a few extra names, stretched out his arms, and looked to the heavens, proclaiming, "The whole world loves me." Another type personality might take this statement as juvenile conceit, but at 4 years old he is expressing how he actually feels and demonstrating that sanguine need for love. In the Time cover story on the Statue of Liberty celebration, the question was headlined, "What makes Reagan so remarkably popular as a president?" They then listed many sanguine strengths. He has found the American sweet spot, he grins his boyish grin and bobs his head, he has a genius for American occasions, he is a magician, a master illusionist, he will hound out the sparklers, he has a genial crinkly face that prompts a sense of wonder. He has the luck that comes to the optimist. His life is a sort of fairy tale of American power. They then ask, how does he do it? How does he always come out on top? Why is he called the Teflon president? The answer they give is, he enjoys an easy and sometimes mysterious communion with the American people. He has become a ceremonial presence. As the interviewers listened to his humorous anecdotes, they asked why he was so successful, and he answered simply, I love people. When you love people, they love you back, and oh, how the sanguine loves love. Everyone likes attention and approval, but for the sanguine, it's an emotional need. The choleric needs achievement and appreciation. Because the choleric is born a leader, he has the need to see things accomplished and has a mental progress list stored in his brain. Where the melancholy writes his agendas on paper, the choleric plots his life out quickly in his head and gives instant commands to everyone in sight. He assumes others both need and want instruction and feels those who aren't marching to his drumbeat are lazy. A choleric man wants to know what his wife did all day. One man told me if he didn't post a list of what needed to be done each day, his wife wouldn't get out of the chair. Choleric women keep the children moving, use all available manpower, and get frustrated when their husbands don't respond to their call to arms. Since they are usually married to phlegmatics who look forward to the weekend's rest, their insatiable need for getting things done is now often thwarted. Once they've tried suggestions, lists, demands, and threats, they storm off in anger and the husband says, I wonder what's wrong with her. He may not care enough to get up and find out, but he does think about it during commercials. Because the choleric wife is now on the roof nailing down loose shingles, she is expecting some moderate praise for her noble efforts. However, the husband will choose not to mention the subject at all and hope she won't remember he didn't do it. She waits for the appreciation she feels she deserves, and the more she hints for it, the more determined he is not to give it. Unfortunately, this Cold War exists in many marriages and even in business situations, where the choleric will do extra work and then expect credit for his efforts. Since the others didn't want to do the job and he jumped into it on his own, no one sees a reason to praise him. What a cycle of misreading one another's needs. The choleric workaholic nature appears self-satisfied, but much of what he does is inwardly a cry for recognition. If he has not received praises as a child, he will work himself to death trying to stimulate his parents to enthusiastic comments. He wants to hear those words, I don't know how you've ever accomplished this much. When cholerics don't receive credit or others don't thank them, they often say, after all I've done for them. Because of her need for achievement, a choleric woman can't watch TV without something moving in her hands. She must knit, paint, or iron, anything rather than waste precious time. I even consider brushing my teeth a time waster, and I often polish the mirror with my other hand while shutting a drawer with my foot. Sometimes I walk through the house picking things up while brushing, get a phone call, lay that brush down, and that night I have no idea where my toothbrush could be. Yes, cholerics have a compulsion for constant achievement. We all like to accomplish what we set out to do, and we enjoy being appreciated, but for cholerics, these become emotional needs. The melancholy needs order and sensitivity. The melancholy is a perfectionist who must have his life in order and hopefully everyone else's as well. For some, this desire is restricted to the area of artistic expression, while others need perfection in physical surroundings. A melancholy with a sanguine wife who is a poor housekeeper either takes over the duties, criticizes her mistakes, or gets depressed. If the melancholy leads toward the choleric, he will be much harder on himself than if he is in part phlegmatic, in which case he will occasionally give up and say in disgust, "Oh, what the use." The melancholy also has a deep need to be understood and longs for others to respond with sensitivity to his inner struggles and to commiserate with him over flip comments made by shallow people attempting to be funny. Because the melancholy mind is a series of charts, you can be sure he knows when you have sent a gift and when you forgot. He will say, "It doesn't matter," but it does. Fred's grandfather, who always insisted that we not buy him any presents, was able each Christmas to keep a mental record of what each family member gave him. Even though there would be droves of great-grandchildren, he was able to check off each one without benefit of paper or pencil and announce at the end of the day, "I guess little Tommy doesn't love me anymore. He didn't give me a thing." Because the melancholy is so unwilling to express his needs, he throws others into a constant guessing game. Each year, I tell Fred everything I see that I would possibly want for Christmas, which is, of course, almost everything I see. Although I ask him often what he'd like, he never tells me. This year I asked him why he wouldn't give me gift suggestions when I am so helpful to him. He replied, "If you really loved me, you would be sensitive enough to my needs to figure it out. If I tell you, there's no joy of response." He then proceeded to gently reprimand me for my constant suggestions that I had considered a virtue. "When you point out everything you like, it leaves nothing to my imagination and there are no surprises." Isn't it amazing how different we are? How what seems right to one is wrong for the other? I now bite my tongue when I see a soft aqua robe that I would love to have, and I try to read Fred's mind before Christmas. This intense need of the melancholy for others to delve deeply into his subconscious and come up with his innermost thoughts puts a tremendous amount of pressure on any relationship, and because the melancholy keeps score, this combination can terminate friendships. One young couple with a sanguine wife and a melancholy husband rented a large cabin sailboat for a weekend. Another couple had expressed interest in going out with them sometime, so they invited them. The rental was several $100s, and at the end of 3 days the other couple thanked them for the good time and left. The husband kept waiting for them to send him a check for their part of the bill. When I asked, had he made this clear to them ahead of time, he responded, "If they had any sense, they would have known how much it costs and that they should pay half." "They should have known" is a frequent statement of the melancholy. Probably they should know, but what a shame that the hurt melancholy refused to ever see this couple again. We all appreciate order and hope for sensitivity, but for the melancholy, these traits become emotional needs. The phlegmatic needs respect and a feeling of worth. The phlegmatic's goal in life is to keep the peace, and when this is not possible, the phlegmatic sometimes withdraws and emotionally shuts down, often refusing any communication until some facsimile of peace is restored. Rather than face the enemy, the phlegmatics retreat until one side wins the war, and then they join the victorious team. Because the phlegmatic's desire is to have peace, we might assume that a quiet room with a recliner chair would meet his needs, but underneath, like Rodney Dangerfield, he is longing for respect. Because I am not phlegmatic, it took an inspiration from the Lord for me to see this need for worth in my phlegmatic mother. It is so easy for the other temperaments to ignore the phlegmatics since they are not crying out for attention, and after a while the phlegmatic feels useless and of no value. Others seem to want to change the phlegmatic to be what they are. Sanguines assume no one could be happy if they are not jumping up and down with enthusiasm, so they feel called upon to elicit some cheer from the phlegmatic. I would try to excite my mother with tales of grandeur, and she'd only respond, "That's nice." I felt I'd failed, so I'd get more dramatic. The harder I tried, the less she responded. I didn't realize that my adventures made her feel as she didn't amount to a row of pins. She needed me to settle down and give her credit for her peaceful, accepting attitude about living in the retirement home. Because sanguines want approval, they try to make the phlegmatics excited and fail to realize their need for respect. The choleric tries to make the phlegmatic get moving. For the choleric, what they perceive as laziness is a sin unto death. How could anyone not want to produce? I asked a phlegmatic friend to pass out some outlines at the beginning of a seminar. She dutifully agreed. Next to the morning pile of outlines was a stack clearly labeled "Afternoon Outlines." When the program started after lunch, I noticed no one had outlines. As I went to get them and hand them to her, she said, "Oh, I didn't know I had to do it twice." A choleric cannot understand this passive thinking or lack thereof, and the choleric's innate reaction is one of disgust, which signals to the phlegmatic, who truly did not understand, that he is stupid and worthless. The melancholy tries to get the phlegmatic interested in details and seeking perfection. The harder he pushes, the more the phlegmatic pulls back and softly comments, "It doesn't make that much difference to me, and who cares anyhow?" The melancholy ponders a while and assumes he didn't make the point clear enough, so he tries an explanation of greater detail, which so turns the phlegmatic off that he just shrugs. This lack of zeal is taken by the melancholy as rejection, and he becomes depressed. Isn't it amazing how we so badly misread others unless we understand their basic personalities and their underlying needs? The phlegmatic does not want to be goaded on by the others to become something he really isn't. He just wants to be accepted as he is and be considered a person of value and worth. Where would we all be if we didn't have the peace-loving phlegmatic to give us much-needed balance and to tone down our compulsions? Thank your phlegmatic mate, friend, or child for their easygoing nature. If they didn't have it, how would they put up with the rest of us? We all want to feel that we are people of worth, but for the phlegmatic, respect is an emotional need. While I often get letters with fun examples I could use from sanguines and straight suggestions from cholerics and additional facts and details from melancholies, I seldom hear from phlegmatics. I assume their feeling of not being worthy prevents their writing me a letter, but when I do receive one like this, I get excited. Your seminar helped me so much to understand who I am. One of the things that has been so difficult for me to grasp is the fact that God accepts me just the way I am. My question has always been, but who am I? I am always trying to figure out why I am so blah. Something must be wrong because I can't organize a good outline like another Sunday school teacher or always have a boundless burst of energy, planning lots of things and staying up late and making fun out of cleaning my house. You described me well when you said if you gave a phlegmatic 2 hours to do the job, they would take all of the 2 hours. With me, it's usually more. When I finally got a hold of the truth that it is okay for me to not have all those qualities that everyone else has, and that there has nothing wrong with my own character, I began to see myself for the person I really am. How freeing and what hope. I am excited about me. I'm not dumb and stupid and non-interesting. My blankness that I sometimes feel is not because the Lord left something out of my brain. Just because I can't follow directions as well as I am expected to doesn't mean that I don't listen. How refreshing it was to sit for 3 hours after I drove home from the retreat and to share with my husband these simple yet vital truths about our personalities, and he listened. We bear so much about accepting others just the way they are, but we really don't know who they are so that we can accept them. May God bless you and your ministry in bringing people to a position of knowing themselves so that Christ can balance their lives to be a glory to Him. Loretta McClure. One lady came to a Personality Plus seminar and later wrote, "Since I've started to grow up emotionally, I've stopped playing What's My Line, and I'm into Tell the Truth. In Shakespearean play Hamlet, the aging Polonius gives his young son some advice. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." For further study, thought, and action. It's hard to be true to yourself until you know who you are. Is it possible to understand others when you're confused over your own identity? According to what you've already learned, what is your primary personality? What is your basic temperament desire? What are your general underlying needs? If you are married, answer the following about your mate. What is his or her primary personality? What is his or her basic desire temperament-wise? What are his or her general underlying needs? Now that we have looked at the general underlying needs of each temperament, let's get more specific. One day I sat down and made a list of the 3 personal emotional needs I had as a child. 1. Because I lived in 3 tiny rooms behind my father's store and 8 in front of the customers, I longed for a normal house with a dining room. Everyone else had at least a front door, and to go from their bedroom to their bathroom, they didn't have to pass a cash register. I felt abnormal and deprived, and a simple house became an emotional need. 2. Each night when my father counted up the day's receipts, there was anxiety over whether we could pay our bills. We always did manage to eat, but there was never anything left over, and the total allowance for us 3 children was 1 cent's worth of candy a day. I can remember longing for enough money to have a banana split, and I went to work at 14 selling chocolates in Mitchell's department store so I could have some sense of security. For me, money became an emotional need. 3. Because there were no cosmetics or permanents when I was young, a girl was either a natural beauty or plain. I fell into the latter category. I envied Peggy, who had thick blonde braids, long eyelashes, and a turned-up nose with freckles on it. Her mother bought her dresses, while mine were homemade, and Peggy was pretty. A longing for looks and clothes became an emotional need. Before showing my list to Fred, I asked him to think about his 3 emotional needs. 1. He immediately remembered how he never felt loved. Although he lived in a big house with a maid and a nursemaid, he never felt his parents really cared. They both worked daily, and while he was well provided for, he felt ignored. The lack of personal and physical love created a vacuum in his life and became an emotional need. 2. Because no one seemed to pay attention to what he was doing, Fred excelled in sports in the hopes of winning his parents' approval. The only time his father came to an event was at a track meet where his dad arrived after Fred had won the race. Even though he won letters and trophies, he never felt his parents took note of his achievements, and his desire for approval became an emotional need. 3. Fred remembers being lonely even when there were people around. Activities seemed to be planned by adults for adults, and in his melancholy memory, home life was not much fun. Although large parties took place on weekends, Fred felt he was on the fringes of the family fun. This lack of participation and excitement became depressing, and his desire for family fulfillment became an emotional need. As Fred and I compared our childhood needs, we saw that they were not at all alike. We then added a sufficiencies column and were even more surprised. Florence needs house, sufficiencies, love. Fred needs love, sufficiencies, house. Florence needs money, sufficiencies, approval. Fred needs approval, sufficiencies, money. Florence needs looks and clothes, sufficiencies, family fun. Fred needs family fun, sufficiencies, looks and clothes. My needs were his sufficiencies, and his sufficiencies were my needs. No wonder we had failed to communicate our opposite needs to each other. He had the big house, plenty of money, and was voted most handsome boy at Camp Agawan. I was surrounded by love. People were applauding me as I recited my elocution pieces to an ever-changing audience in the store, and life was one comical sanguine experience after another. As you pause to analyze your needs and write them down in your personality notebook, first look at those that are general for your temperament pattern, and then list your personal childhood needs and sufficiencies as Fred and I have done. Are they opposite or similar? Have you ever discussed your needs before? For a group study, compare your needs and sufficiencies list with that of others, noting similarities and differences. Be careful not to put down another person's feelings if you have a different point of view. Group fellowship takes place only in an accepting atmosphere. If you have time, project the understanding of your needs into your relationships at business, in church, or in your family. Have each person share a marriage, business, or social problem that could have been avoided if you'd only understood. How much more appreciation we have for the game of life when we hold a scorecard and understand the personalities, aims, and needs of the players. One morning on the Today Show, Norman Vincent Peale explained why he and his wife Ruth had never had a successful marriage. We each do what we do best, and we respect the other's differences. Chapter 4. What leads you into temptation? From the time we were children, many of us have been able to recite the Lord's Prayer, at least in a group situation, and we know the line, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." However, few of us ever thought the verse applied to us, as we are good people, not given to plucking forbidden fruit. We were brought up on Bible stories, and know that if we ever ran into evil in an alley, he would be properly dressed in a red costume, would carry a pitchfork, and would look like the devil. In my childhood church, we worshiped the God of good works, and we are taught that the 5 commandments essential for eternal security. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't fool around, don't play cards, and don't sue on Sunday. I knew how not to smoke or drink, but I wasn't too clear on what it meant to not fool around, although I didn't think I was doing it. In college, I went through a rebellious period where I learned to play bridge, and once, when visiting my virtuous grandmother, I sewed on Sunday and stitched my thumb into the seam. Grandmother looked first to the heavens, then down at me as she intoned, "God is punishing you for your sin," a condemnation I would still hear today if I should sew on a quick button before leaving for church. When I wrote "After Every Wedding Comes a Marriage" in 1981, I inserted the chapter on "The Other Woman" with some apprehension. Was I bringing up a subject the Christian world didn't want to handle? Was I answering a question no one was asking? Was I 5 years ahead of my time? In retrospect, the topic of infidelity in the church was brought up none too soon, and the Other Woman chapter has been the most popular. The list of do's and don'ts for those women who find themselves with an unfaithful husband has brought forth repeated comments such as, "I wish I'd read this a year ago. I did all the don'ts and none of the do's." As I speak on this subject, I take the assumption that no one in the audience has had an adulterous mate, but if your husband was looking for another woman, what would she be like? We then go over a chart where each woman fills in what her husband would want. Perhaps the most proactive question is, if your husband were looking for a place to have an affair this afternoon, would he choose your bedroom the way you left it this morning? This thought produces gasps, screams, and occasional laughter from the ladies as the image of their bedroom flashes before their eyes in living color. Many have whispered to me on the way out, "I'm going home to clean the bedroom." And some have written later to tell of redecorating in the hopes of restoring romance to a boring relationship. We ought to spend some creative time in analyzing our partner's obvious desires and underlying needs. While a messy bedroom and a dead philodendron on the windowsill probably won't send a man off to search out a new mate, these conditions do indicate a lack of concern for the other person. A man who says he'll be home for dinner each night at 6 and repeatedly returns hours later with no call of explanation and may not be fooling around, but he surely communicates to his wife that her time is of no value and that she is not worth much more. As Christians, we should be examples to our children and our community of what a loving marriage is like, and of how it is still possible to have a positive relationship in an increasingly negative world. Yet as I listen to the stories of rejection and rebellion among Christian couples, I know we all need help. If I had a magic formula for a happy marriage, I could make a fortune, but I can at least share that's when we start understanding and then meeting our partner's needs. We do reduce the risk of their looking somewhere else for fulfillment. Isn't it worth a try? We often read in magazines and self-help journals about meeting needs, but seldom are we told how to do it. We don't know what other people's needs are. We don't think to ask, and if we do, they give us the wrong answers. It's difficult to put your finger on an emotional need. We can look around our home and notice we need new carpeting. We can look in our closet and see we need new clothes. We can look in our refrigerator and see we need new supplies. But we don't know how to look into our hearts, or harder yet into the hearts of others, and see what's needed. Now that we understand the 4 basic temperaments, we have a most practical tool for sensing inner hurts and needs. We are no longer grappling in the dark. We have just seen in the last chapter that each personality has its own needs. The sanguine needs approval, the choleric appreciation, the melancholy sensitivity, and the phlegmatic self-worth. The sanguine longs for attention and approval. The sanguine who appears on the surface to be happy in any situation is underneath looking for attention, acceptance, and approval. Sanguines need to know they are loved and that you accept them just as they are. They want an audience who applauds, and they wilt under criticism and poor reviews. Now that we know these needs, let's carry this information one step further. What happens when the sanguine does not get his needs met? As a child, he will do whatever it takes to get attention, often becoming too loud, too annoying, and too much of a show-off. The worst punishment for a sanguine child is being put in a room alone with no phone or TV. In school, the sanguine child will usurp the teacher's attention and chatter constantly with others. This child is craving attention, and he will get it either positive or, if necessary, negative ways. When the sanguine grows up, he marries with the idea that he will finally have someone who will have to pay attention to him. He buys himself an approving audience. Since we tend to marry opposites whose needs are totally different from ours, the mate doesn't have the same point of view. While the melancholy may have applauded the sanguine's humor before marriage, it soon wears thin, and after a while the melancholy won't even sit in the audience, let alone clap enthusiastically. Because the sanguine can always charm someone into being his friend, he begins to wonder why the only person who doesn't think he's cute is his mate. The combination of an outgoing personality and the need for attention makes the sanguine the most vulnerable for temptation from the opposite sex. A sanguine flight attendant named Trisha told me her story. I had noticed her friendly, bubbly personality and started to talk with her. When she found I was a speaker and often spoke on marriage, she sighed. "Well, maybe you can help me with mine." Trisha had married a melancholy businessman who had been attracted by her zest for life. In typical fashion, he wanted her joy, and she was impressed by his stability and success. On their honeymoon, he got upset over her dropping her clothes wherever she stepped out of them and hanging her wet bathing suit on a doorknob instead of rolling it up in a towel and twisting it dry, as he did. He picked up after her and pointed out the error of her ways. Trisha assumed he'd stop all this correction when they got home, and he was busy, but she didn't understand the melancholy nature. She was stunned when he made her place a large towel on the floor each time she sprayed her hair, so that the residual chemicals would not ruin the carpet, and when he gave her a polishing cloth to use in shining the bathroom mirrors immediately following her hair sprayings or toothbrushings. Because she resisted his best laid plans, he continued to criticize her casual behavior. He hoped his withdrawal of approval would encourage her to change, but he didn't understand the sanguine. He stopped complimenting her on her looks and personality that he had worshipped before marriage, and he shook his head when she told him exaggerated stories from her latest trip, the kind of stories that had formerly amused him. Soon, they were both discouraged by each other, and they didn't know why. They each felt they had somehow made a terrible mistake in selecting their mates. Trisha didn't set out to be unfaithful, but because of her need for approval and acceptance, which was not being met or even understood by her husband, who was trying to make her toe the line, she was vulnerable. By the time she told me this story, she had already been out for dinner a few times with a handsome pilot, who thinks I'm just adorable. You don't have to be a marriage counselor to see what will happen to this couple, as each one heads off in opposite directions, seeking someone who will say, "I understand." So many feel that sex is the initial attraction between those who ultimately become unfaithful, and while that may often be the case, I find that the underlying cause is that they are seeking fulfillment of unmet and unexpressed needs. While just knowing this principle may not change a marriage, if both partners are aware of the other's needs and try to meet them, the understanding alone will make a difference. As one lady said, "Just knowing he knows gives me hope." The melancholy seeks a sensitive spirit. The melancholy, above all others, craves a mate who will be sensitive to his deepest inner needs, and yet he tends to marry a sanguine who doesn't even think of digging below the surface. As the melancholy gets depressed, the sanguine turns to happy people, plunging the melancholy deeper into the pit where he awaits someone with sensitivity to rescue him. The melancholy doesn't set out to be unfaithful, but some are led into temptation because their own marriages are not filling their needs. Many years ago, Fred and I were in a church where the melancholy pastor felt unloved and misunderstood. While he was telling Fred his part of the story in the church office, his sanguine wife was crying to me in the foyer. The other woman had walked through the hall, and the wife had fallen apart at the sight of her. The other woman was plain at best, while the wife was stylish and attractive. Surely he had not been drawn to this woman by her looks, but somehow she had been meeting his needs to have someone who was sensitive, thoughtful, and caring, attributes that were not natural in his wife. This woman had been volunteering to help in the church office and had a knack for anticipating the pastor's needs. She came in each day, straightened up his office, and served him coffee. When he finished a long day of counseling, she'd drop by and listen attentively to the depressing problems which he couldn't share with his chatty wife, who didn't like to listen, who would have spread the case histories and gossip, and who didn't like sad stories anyway. Here was a man who hadn't meant to stray, and who knew better, but who was vulnerable. Gratefully, the eruption took place when Fred and I were there, and when we saw what he was heading into, the pastor was willing to keep the woman out of his office and cease the relationship. His wife became willing to discuss his needs, which she had never even noticed before, and to curb her tongue, which had gotten them both into trouble in the past. What a difference it can make when we can start meeting each other's needs at home. The choleric wants to be appreciated. Because the choleric appears to have life under control, his mate, usually phlegmatic, doesn't sense he's craving appreciation for all he's done. One lady said of her husband, "I just thought he loved to work. It never occurred to me to make a big deal of each project." A man stated, "She knows she can run circles around everyone else. If I tell her she's great, she'll get a swelled head." In today's world, where any man can find someone to smile at him, or any woman can find a listening ear, how important it is for all of us to understand each other's needs, talk about them, and try to fill them before it's too late. A doctor's wife told me, "He thinks he's God. The nurses bow when he enters, and the patients' very lives depend upon him. When he comes home, I bring him down to size." That's exactly what this phlegmatic lady was doing, and he didn't appreciate her deflating and sarcastic comments. Since cholerics only want to play games they can win, they will avoid any place where they are looked at as losers. This choleric doctor had ceased coming home until late at night when his wife was already asleep. In the morning, for punishment, she'd not talk to him, and she'd purposely neglect to pick up his shirts at the cleaners until he ran out, at which point he'd yell at her. She then blamed his terrible temper and unreasonable nature for their marriage problems. Neither one was meeting the other's needs, and they had declared war. He was already spending his evenings with an assortment of nurses, and she was taking a course at church on raising her self-image. Once she understood that he needed to come home to a positive personality and be praised for how hard he worked and how well he provided for the family, she was willing to make these changes. Once she saw that this apparent conceit was increased by her lack of affirmation and that he wasn't out to get her, she stopped her quiet war to scuttle his ship of state. The phlegmatic just wants respect. Because the phlegmatic is a low-key person, the maid often takes him or her for granted. As one wife said of her phlegmatic husband, "I hardly notice he's there, for he and the couch have become one." A busy choleric wife tends to pass the phlegmatic husband by in a hurry and think, because he's quiet and undemanding, he has no needs. It is true that the phlegmatic can become content in whatsoever state he's in, but after a while he wonders if he matters at all. One phlegmatic man stated about his wife and family, "It's like they are on some great team, and I'm in the last row of the grandstand." A phlegmatic wife said, "Our family is an army battalion. He's the general, and I'm on KP." While the phlegmatic with his cool, relaxed nature doesn't set out to have an affair, it is easy to see that when someone makes him feel important, he perks up. A phlegmatic lady came to me at a conference after I'd spoken on adultery to tell me of her relationship with a church choir director. "My husband hasn't even noticed me for years. No matter what I wear or do, he doesn't see it. He hasn't given me any presents, and he just takes me for granted." In contrast, the choir director complimented her on everything she wore and gave her solo parts because he loved her voice. He had sent roses to the hotel that day and had called her 3 times while her husband hadn't phoned once. As she stated, "I haven't done anything wrong yet, but it's the first time I felt worth anything in years." If only her husband knew that inside that quiet, unassuming woman was a heart crying out for some feeling of significance, some sign that he cared. If only each married person could meet the other's needs, we could cut down the rising number of divorces in the church. Without any how-tos, we tend to bumble along, but from here on, as we function with knowledge, we can redeem our marriages before it's too late. Remember, sanguines need attention and approval. They wilt under criticism. Melancholies need order and sensitivity. They become depressed in chaos. Cholerics need appreciation for all they've done. They stay away from ungrateful people. Phlegmatics need respect and a feeling of worth. They withdraw when they are ignored. Don't let your partner be led into temptation. For further study, thought, and action. Remembering what I wrote about the other woman, or could have written about the other man, state your partner's desires and underlying needs as you now understand them. Ask yourself, if my partner were vulnerable to temptation, what would the other person look like? What needs would he or she fill that I don't fill? In what kind of a setting would they choose to meet? What would they talk about? What can I do to prevent another person from coming on the scene? Am I willing to do that? Write down your answers, sit down with your mate when the two of you are alone, and ask these same questions. Do you both agree? In a group, draw up a profile of a typical person of each temperament and what each would be most easily tempted by. Then personalize this list with group members. Discuss one underlying need that each person has that is not being met and what can be done about this. For those who are single, divorced, or widowed, review past relationships, see where mistakes were made, and prepare for prevention of these problems in the future. Study Philippians 4:8 and apply it to mates or friends. What about this person is true and honest, noble and worthy, right and orderly, pure and blameless, lovely and attractive, admirable and appealing? If anything is excellent or virtuous or praiseworthy, think on these things. Personalities led into temptation. Sanguine. When mate doesn't give compliments or laugh at his humor. Choleric. When mate doesn't get things done and doesn't appreciate his achievements. Phlegmatic. When mate takes him for granted and he feels worthless. Melancholy. When mate lacks sensitivity to his needs and life is no longer in order. Now that you know this truth, how happy you will be if you put it into practice. John 13:17.